My sister didn't save me a seat at her graduation party. You're just a barista, what would you even talk about? She snorted. My aunt whispered, she said you'd ruin the photos. I nodded politely. On the next day, she walked into her dream job interview and found me at the other side of the desk. And that was. My sister Isla just graduated from college and had a huge party to celebrate. I was invited, but when I showed up, I realized that I wasn't really welcome. She told me I'd ruin the photos and made it clear that I wasn't part of her perfect world. I didn't let it bother me, at least not at first. But the very next day, I walked into an interview for my dream job, and guess who was sitting across from me? Yup, my sister. That's right. She was the one interviewing me for a position at her company. I've always been the other sister. Isla and I grew up in the same house, but it never really felt like we were from the same family. I was the quiet one, the introverted one who always found comfort in my little corner of the world, and she was the social butterfly. She was always the one who got attention, the one everyone called perfect. Isla went to a prestigious university, graduated with honors, and landed a job at one of the top tech companies in the city. Meanwhile, I worked at a coffee shop, managing a few shifts and trying to make enough to pay the bills. I loved it, though. The job felt like mine, and I didn't mind the late shifts or dealing with grumpy customers. It kept me busy, and it gave me time to think, which was all I really needed. But I always felt, well, overlooked. I had hoped that when Isla's graduation day finally came, she'd acknowledge me more. Maybe I'd get a seat at her party, even if just for a moment. But when the invitation arrived, something in me told me not to get my hopes up. Isla was the golden child, after all. The invitation was addressed to me, sure, but I wasn't expecting much. And when I arrived at the venue, an upscale banquet hall with chandeliers and an open bar, I wasn't exactly surprised when I saw where I stood in the grand scheme of things. I walked in, and no one greeted me. Isla was in the center of everything, surrounded by her friends, her boyfriend, and my parents, all laughing and chatting like they were part of some exclusive club I wasn't allowed into. I wandered around the edge of the room, looking for someone to talk to, but it wasn't long before I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. My Aunt Lila was seated at a table nearby, her arms crossed as she sipped on a glass of wine. She watched me for a moment before leaning in and whispering something to my mom, who then looked at me with that same distant expression she always had. I felt like I was a ghost in the room. And then, Isla's voice cut through the crowd. You're just a barista, what would you even talk about? She said it loudly enough for several people to hear, and I saw her friend snicker behind her. The sting of those words hit me harder than I wanted to admit, but I swallowed it down. I was used to her. Used to her subtle barbs and her passive-aggressive way of putting me in my place. My aunt's words followed soon after. She said you'd ruin the photos, she whispered with a look of distaste. I nodded. Politely, as I always did. But deep down, I felt something break. Something shifted in me that night. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to stay in the shadows anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Isla. Hey, I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean it like that, it's just. You wouldn't really fit in, you know? I stared at the screen for a long moment. I could feel the anger rising inside of me, but I didn't respond. I didn't have to. There was no point in arguing anymore. The truth was, I had known where I stood in her eyes for a long time. I didn't need her to apologize, because I had already moved past it. I had a decision to make. I could keep playing the part of the supportive little sister, standing in the background of her perfect life, or I could finally take a step forward for myself. That afternoon, I got an email that changed everything. It was from a company I had applied to months ago. I hadn't heard back from them in ages, so I had written them off. But now, here it was, an interview invitation for a position I hadn't dared hope for. I hadn't planned on applying for anything big. But this opportunity? It was everything I wanted. Everything I deserved. So I jumped at it. I prepared my resume, double-checked every detail, and even practiced answering the most difficult questions I could think of. This wasn't just another job, this was a fresh start. I wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in my way. I didn't tell Isla. I didn't tell anyone. This was mine, and it felt good to have something that was entirely mine. The interview was scheduled for the following week. I wore the best outfit I could afford, a simple black dress that I hoped looked professional, but still felt like me. I arrived at the company's sleek downtown building, heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't nervous about the job. No, I was nervous about what was going to happen next. As I stepped into the elevator, my mind raced. This was it. This was the moment I had been working for. When the doors opened on the floor of the interview, I was led into a conference room, where I was introduced to the person who would be interviewing me. I froze when I saw her. It was Isla. She sat behind the desk, looking up at me with that confident, almost smug expression she always wore. I could feel the air between us crackle with tension, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Her eyes widened for a split second before she quickly masked it with a smile. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice faltering slightly. I took a deep breath. "I'm here for the interview," I said calmly, my heart still racing but my voice steady. She blinked, obviously surprised. "But you're not even qualified," she began to say, but I cut her off. "I actually am," I replied. "I've been working in customer service for years, handling high-pressure situations. I've developed my leadership skills, and I've worked hard to get where I am. I have the experience." She looked down at her papers, her fingers fidgeting slightly. I could see the shock starting to set in, and a small part of me felt a rush of satisfaction. For the rest of the interview, I kept my composure. I answered questions with confidence, detailing everything I had learned in my current job. I didn't just talk about my barista experience. I talked about the skills I had honed, about managing schedules, handling difficult customers, and problem-solving under pressure. Isla's facade began to crack. I could see the unease creeping into her eyes. And then, as the interview came to a close, I stood up, ready to leave. "Good luck with your next interviews," I said, offering her a smile. But before I walked out, I added one final line. "By the way, I got the job." Her mouth fell open in surprise, but I was already out the door, my heart soaring. The next few days passed in a blur. I got the official offer from the company, and I couldn't stop smiling. This was my chance. This was my time. Isla texted me again, saying she wanted to talk. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was, I didn't owe her anything. I had worked hard to get here, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not my sister, make me feel small again. The next few days were filled with a strange mix of emotions. As much as I felt a deep sense of satisfaction from the interview, there was still a lingering sense of discomfort in my chest. Isla's role in my life had always been that of the dominant sibling, the one everyone expected to succeed, the one everyone turned to. And yet, here I was, finally stepping into my own success while she was left questioning her own. After the interview, I avoided Isla's calls and texts. I didn't want to deal with her excuses or her attempts to apologize. A part of me was tempted to just leave things as they were, to let the universe handle the fallout, but another part of me knew better. The truth was, I wasn't just doing this for the job. I was doing it for me. For the validation I had never gotten, for the recognition I had been denied, and for the sisterly rivalry that had plagued us for years. But I also couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to come to a head sooner or later. That weekend, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through social media, when I saw it. Isla had posted a picture of herself in front of the company building, smiling widely, dressed in her professional attire. "First day at, company name," she captioned the photo, complete with heart emojis and a smiling face. I stared at the photo, trying not to let the bitterness seep through. I knew what was coming next. The inevitable comparison. The subtle, yet calculated praise. The family would soon be raving about how amazing Isla's life was, and there would be no room for me at the table. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was from my mom. Isla's going to be starting at company name on Monday. She's worked so hard for this. We should celebrate. I could already hear the pride in her voice through the text, and for a moment, I felt a pang of jealousy. I had worked just as hard, if not harder, but no one seemed to notice. I had been quietly building my own career, quietly working toward my goals, but it felt like I would always be overshadowed by Isla's brilliance, her flawless achievements. I sighed and put my phone down. There was no point in getting upset. This was my chance to break free from the cycle, to step away from the competition that had always been there, whether I wanted it or not. A few hours later, I got another text from Isla. She was asking if we could meet up. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. It had been days since the interview, and I knew that things were about to change. I was no longer the younger sister who looked up to her. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I decided to meet her, not because I needed closure, but because I needed to set things straight. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of our relationship anymore. We met at a cafe that we used to visit when we were younger. The place was quiet, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air as I sat down across from her. Isla looked different now. There was a new confidence in her demeanor, a sort of calm that came with the weight of success. But there was also something else, something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the uncertainty behind her eyes, or the fact that she was playing the role of the big sister who had everything together when she really didn't. She spoke first. "Look, I know things have been tense lately," Isla started, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking about it, and I realize I wasn't fair to you. I didn't mean to make you feel small or unimportant. I didn't understand what you wanted from me." I blinked. The words were familiar, but they didn't feel like an apology, not the way I wanted to hear it. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've been fine on my own. But maybe you don't see it, Isla. You've always seen me as the one who's been left behind. But that's not the case anymore. I'm doing just fine, and I don't need you to feel sorry for me." Her face twisted, a mix of surprise and frustration crossing her features. "I don't feel sorry for you, though. I'm just trying to understand. Why didn't you tell me about the job? I thought we were supposed to be sharing these things, you know?" "I didn't tell you because I knew what would happen," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "I knew you'd make it about yourself. That's always been the problem, Isla. Everything's about you. Your accomplishments. Your dreams. Your success. And the rest of us are supposed to just cheer from the sidelines." Isla was silent for a moment, and I could see her processing my words. Her eyes dropped to the table, her fingers playing with her coffee cup. "I didn't mean to do that," she said softly. "But I guess I have. I've always had this idea of who I should be, and I think I projected that on everyone around me. Including you." For a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she sat back in her chair, her posture stiff, as if she was waiting for something. A reaction, maybe. Something to break the tension. But I wasn't going to give it to her. I wasn't going to be the sister who sat in the background anymore. "I don't need your approval, Isla," I said, standing up and grabbing my purse. "I've worked hard for this. And I'm going to keep going. Whether you think I'm worthy or not." She looked up at me, her eyes searching for something in my face. But I didn't offer her anything. "I hope you do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I walked out of the cafe, leaving Isla behind in the corner where she had always been. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was losing. The days that followed felt surreal. I had the job offer in hand, and I had finally taken control of my own narrative. I wasn't just the little sister anymore. I wasn't just the one who got left behind in the family's photo albums. I was the one who had built something for herself, and it was time for everyone, including Isla, to see that. But there was still something nagging at me. Isla and I had always been at odds, but I had never really understood why. Maybe it was her need to always be the center of attention. Maybe it was because I had spent my life trying to please everyone else. Either way, I knew that the next few months would define our relationship, whether we would continue on as distant sisters, or if we could find a way to work through all the bitterness. But for now, I was done being the second option. I was ready for my own success. The weeks passed, and things with Isla remained strange. There was no dramatic confrontation after that cafe conversation, but the tension between us lingered in the air. It was like a silent war, neither of us directly addressing what had happened, but both of us feeling the weight of it. I focused on my new job, throwing myself into the work. The first few days were overwhelming, lots of new information, a steep learning curve, and a sense of unfamiliarity that made me second-guess myself more than I'd like to admit. But I was determined to succeed. This was my chance to prove to myself, and to everyone else, that I was capable of more than just serving coffee. Meanwhile, Isla's life seemed to unfold in the way I always imagined it would. She had her new job, her friends, her perfect social media posts, and that usual aura of success that everyone adored. My mom and dad couldn't stop talking about her achievements whenever I called them, as if I were supposed to be proud of her for securing everything she'd ever wanted. I smiled politely, of course. I wasn't about to start a fight over the phone, not when I had other things to focus on. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel the sting each time they mentioned her. It wasn't just the comparison that bothered me. It was the unspoken belief that Isla's life was always the one that mattered, the one everyone was watching. It was the constant pressure to match her perfection, to prove that I could be just as successful, just as accomplished, just as worthy of praise. And every time they talked about her, I was reminded that I had always been the backup. I tried to keep things professional at work, burying my feelings behind the tasks that filled my days. The team was small but supportive. I got along with my new colleagues, and I could feel the respect building. I started to gain confidence, answering questions in meetings with a clarity I hadn't realized I had, and providing insight that earned me praise. It felt good. Really good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I wasn't an afterthought. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about Isla, about what she was doing. And every time, it felt like we were moving farther apart, like the gap between us was widening instead of closing. One afternoon, a few weeks into my new job, I got a call from Isla. I hadn't heard from her since our meeting at the cafe, and I hadn't been actively avoiding her. I just hadn't felt the need to reach out. But now, I found myself holding the phone, unsure of whether to answer. I pressed the green button and put the phone to my ear. "Hey," I said, my voice neutral. "Hi," Isla replied, her tone hesitant. "Can we talk?" I wasn't sure what she wanted. Part of me didn't want to give her the chance to apologize again or say something that would make me feel small. But I agreed to meet, knowing that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment for something to change. We met at a small park near my apartment. Isla was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, her face more serious than usual. The sight of her looking so vulnerable, without her usual confident smile, made something stir inside me. Maybe she wasn't as unshakable as I'd always thought. She looked up when I sat beside her. "I know this is going to sound weird," she started, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "But I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. About what I said, about the way I've treated you." I listened quietly, not interrupting. I had heard apologies from her before, but I needed to know that this was real. That this wasn't just her way of making herself feel better. I don't know how to say this," she continued, her voice softer than usual. "I've always been the one who got attention. The one who was praised for everything. And I guess I never realized how much I hurt you. How much I left you out. I've been so focused on my own success that I didn't see how it affected you." I waited, watching her carefully. The sincerity in her voice was hard to miss, but the question was whether it was too little too late. I didn't mean to make you feel less than. You're not. You're so much more than what I've let you be. And I know I can't take back what I've said or done, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I really am. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't the old anger that used to bubble up when she acted this way, but a strange sense of relief. Maybe we could move past this. Maybe we could finally start seeing each other as equals. I've been angry at you for a long time, I said, breaking the silence. But I also know that I've been holding on to that anger because I didn't think I deserved to be treated better. I didn't think I deserved to be seen as anything more than a backup. Isla's face softened, and she nodded. You do deserve better. You've always deserved better. And I see that now. You've always been working hard, just in a way that's different from me. I took a deep breath. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed to say. But I wasn't sure how to express all the years of resentment and the weight of feeling unseen. You've never really seen me for who I am, have you? I asked quietly, the words coming out before I could stop them. You've always compared me to you. To your life. Your success. And I've always been the one in the background, just cheering you on. But I can't do that anymore. Not for you, and not for anyone. For a moment, Isla didn't speak. She just sat there, looking at me, her expression a mix of surprise and guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered again, as if she hadn't said it enough already. I sighed, shaking my head. It's not about the apology anymore. It's about us changing things. About me standing up for myself. And you respect that. She nodded. I respect that. I really do. And for the first time, it felt like we were on the same page. Maybe not in the way I had expected, but at least it was a step forward. Maybe we were both finally understanding that we didn't have to compete. That we could both be successful, in our own ways. The silence between us was comfortable now, not strained. It was different than before, more peaceful. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't competing with Isla anymore. Maybe we weren't competing at all. As the weeks passed, the tension between Isla and I seemed to settle, but the quiet understanding between us was fragile. We'd spoken a few more times, texted occasionally, and I found myself slowly coming to terms with everything. But the bitterness still lingered beneath the surface. I wasn't sure what kind of relationship we would have moving forward, if we could ever truly be sisters without the shadow of competition and resentment between us. However, something happened at work that turned everything upside down. A few days before my 1-month anniversary at the company, I walked into the office to find my team buzzing with excitement. I was still relatively new, but my hard work and dedication hadn't gone unnoticed. My boss, Jack, called me into his office for a meeting that afternoon. You're doing great, Kate, Jack said with a smile as he sat down behind his desk. We've noticed your contributions and leadership skills. You're going to be the lead on the upcoming project. We're promoting you to project manager. I could hardly believe it. The promotion was a huge step in my career. It meant more responsibility, but it also meant recognition, real recognition. I walked out of Jack's office feeling like I was floating on air. This was the validation I had been craving, the affirmation that all my hard work had paid off. But as soon as I got home, I saw Isla's name flash on my phone screen. It was a text from her, and I didn't know whether to feel relieved or anxious. Hey, I heard you got a promotion, she wrote. That's awesome. Congrats. It was simple enough, but there was something about the way she phrased it that made my stomach turn. I didn't respond immediately. I had a lot on my mind. I didn't want to get caught up in Isla's world again, and I definitely didn't want to make her feel like I was gloating. But it was hard to ignore the fact that this promotion meant more than just a job upgrade. It felt like a victory, my victory. The next morning, I walked into the office with a new sense of purpose. I was still reeling from the news, still getting used to the idea that I was now seen as someone who could lead a team. But I was ready to dive in, ready to show everyone that I wasn't just a barista or a background player in Isla's story. I was going to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. However, as I checked my email that morning, something caught my eye: an internal memo. It was about a new job opening at the company, a high-ranking position that would involve overseeing the entire department. I did a double take. The position seemed perfect for me, except there was a catch. The hiring committee was composed of several senior employees, including Isla. I froze for a moment. The irony of the situation was almost too much. Here I was, finally making a name for myself, and now I had to face Isla in a professional setting, again. But I didn't let it shake me. Instead, I gathered my thoughts and crafted the best application I could. I knew that I was qualified. I had the experience, the skills, and the drive. And this was my opportunity to finally surpass Isla, professionally, anyway. A few days later, the hiring committee reached out to me. They wanted to schedule an interview. The day of the interview came, and I sat across from Isla, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. She smiled at me, and for a moment, I wondered if she had forgotten about all the things she'd done to me in the past. But that thought quickly evaporated when she spoke. "So, Kate," she began, her tone professional, but I could hear the faint hint of competition in her voice. "Tell me why you think you're the best candidate for this role." I smiled back at her, keeping my composure. "I've been with the company for a while now. I know the ins and outs, and I've consistently shown leadership and dedication. I believe I can take the team to the next level and help push the department forward. I'm ready for this role, Isla. I've earned it." She looked at me, her gaze unwavering. But I could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes as I spoke. She had expected me to be meek, to shy away from the challenge. But I wasn't backing down anymore. Isla was no longer the one calling the shots in my life. I was. And it felt good to finally have that power. The interview went well, and by the end, I had a sense that I had made my mark. I didn't know how the decision would go, but I didn't care. I had already won. A few days later, I received an email from HR. I had been selected for the position. I couldn't believe it. This was everything I had been working for. It wasn't just a promotion. It was the chance to take control of my career in a way I had never imagined. But the real satisfaction came when I walked into the office the next morning and found Isla sitting at her desk, her face tense as she glanced up at me. She knew. I held the email up in front of her, a small smile curling at my lips. "I got the job," I said, my voice steady but carrying the weight of my accomplishment. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustrating. It was acknowledgement. "I'm proud of you, Kate," Isla finally said, though her voice was soft, almost uncertain. And in that moment, I realized something: I didn't need Isla's approval. I didn't need her to validate me. I had already done what I set out to do. I had surpassed her on my own terms. As I walked back to my desk, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. Not only had I taken the job she had once thought would be hers, but I had done it without stooping to her level. No drama, no bitterness. Just a solid victory that I could carry with me. And for the first time, I felt like I had truly stepped out of her shadow. I was no longer the backup. I was the one who had created my own success. Isla had always been the golden child, but now it was my turn. And this time, no one could take that away from me.